I think today we are having a great session on General Average. Indeed, the title is also very interesting. You, me, and common adventure. Actually, the title.
How did we come to this particular topic?
I think today we are having a great session on General Average. Indeed, the title is also very interesting. You, me, and common adventure. Actually, the title.
How did we come to this particular topic?
I think today we are having
There is an echo.
There's an echo actually.
Very interesting. You, me, and common adventure.
I think it's a recorded passage of Dr. Arun, which is playing now.
Okay, don't worry about that because the video live streaming was also on, and
okay.
So I've switched that off. Switch that off means I've stopped the screen. Okay, so we are going live now. So all yours to Sanjeev.
Yeah, sure.
1, 2, 3. Give 5 seconds and then you start speaking.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's about 6 p.m. in Hong Kong and Singapore, so we're starting this webinar. A warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Institute of Chartered Brokers Hong Kong branch. We welcome you all to this amazing webinar. We thank our co-organizers, Indian Maritime University, Hong Kong Maritime Arbitration Group, and Singapore Chamber of Maritime Arbitration, and all the supporting organizations and media partners. We are nearing to the end of this year, and we welcome you all to this interesting topic of General Average, you, me, and common adventure. We have an exciting and hopefully a very informative evening ahead, led by all star cast of panelists. Taking charge of proceeding today, Mr. Jagmeet Makkar, who doesn't need an introduction, but still my duty to formally introduce him to our audience. Mr. Jagmeet Makkar is the chairman of Hong Kong branch of Institute of Chartered Brokers. IMEI chair at the Indian Maritime University, Ambassador Asia of the Baltic Expert Witness Association, board director of Global Met, and on the advisory board of GMAC under the Gujarat Maritime University. He's a practicing maritime arbitrator and on the panel and list of number of arbitration bodies. Probably this is the shortest introduction I've ever heard or given or read about Mr. Makkar. So without wasting any more time, handing over to you, Jagmeet-san. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate for your kind words, Sanjeev. You know, it was a few months ago, there was a brief discussion between me and Arun on the LinkedIn, I remember, on General Average. And we were wondering what name to give, basically, you know, like General Average, how to put it forward in a simplistic way, such a complex topic. Then we had a number of topics. So this one really was quite interesting. You, me, and the common maritime adventure. It was becoming too long, so we removed the maritime part of it. You, me, and the common maritime adventure became you, me, and common adventure. And I'm very grateful to Sanjeev. He has already mentioned about the co-organizers. We got IMU, which is Indian Maritime University, HKMAG, and SCMA. Many of the commercial professionals, myself included, would immensely benefit from the presentation and discussion today. Some basic questions such as what qualifies as a common maritime adventure? Is the owner entitled to contribution for his losses from a number of other stakeholders, the parties who are involved in this? Will time charter hire contribute to the general average? Is it important for us to understand the basics or simply import clause 25 of the NYP 2015, which has YAR, which again and again you'll hear this particular abbreviation YAR, which is York and Pope Rules 1994. Well, we'll have all these answers from our experts today here, who will tell us a lot about it and possibly help us get a better understanding for our day-to-day work. Before we proceed, I would be delighted to very briefly, of course, introduce our panelists to you. Mr. Rui Hao. Rui is a fellow of the Association of Average Adjusters. He joined Richard Hogg Lindley, part of Charles Taylor Liverpool offices as a trainee average adjuster in 2013 and was transferred to the RHL Hong Kong office in 2014, followed by Charles Taylor adjusting Shanghai office between 2015 and 20, where he was responsible for the office management and the claims handling of marine and non-marine losses and business development in the region. In 2020, he was relocated to Liverpool office as an associate director and works on a variety of marine average adjusting cases for ship owners and insurers worldwide. Welcome, Ray. Mr. Raymond Wong, my dear teacher, is the principal of the Asia Maritime Adjusting Hong Kong. He qualified as an average adjuster in 1980, was the first Chinese fellow of the British Association of Average Adjusters, sitting on the advisory and dispute resolution panel. Raymond started with the oldest average adjusting firm, William Richards and Sons, followed by being the former equity partner of Richards Hogg International and following its acquisition by Charles Taylor PLC. He was appointed as the board director thereof in 1999 up to 2008. Now this is interesting, after his first retirement, he continued his commitment to the maritime industry or maritime community and is a very sought after speaker on the claims related topics and is a founding member of the Marine Insurance Club in Hong Kong and Hong Kong Maritime Law Association. It's a pleasure to have you, sir. Dr. Arun Kasi is a law practitioner specializing in maritime law with a particular focus on charter party disputes arbitration. Arun sits as an arbitrator in a few panels. He heads the maritime law firm Arun Kasi and Company based in Kuala Lumpur. He is the author of The Law of Carriage of Goods by Sea, Springer 2021, and has authored 5 other law books, including one on General Average, which he has shared on LinkedIn, and in addition, more than 40 articles on international trade, charter party disputes, cargo claims, and arbitration. He has been involved in this line for over 25 years. Great to have you with us, Arun. Captain Sommer Patnaik. Captain S.R. Patnaik is the CEO and Director of International Shipping and Logistics FZE Dubai. He's a master mariner with 16 years of sailing experience on various types of ships, which include bulk carrier, tankers, and container ships. He has a rich commercial and operational experience in shore-based shipping for over 17 years. That's a total of 33 years of experience in shipping. Captain Patnaik is an active participant in various marine and logistics seminars and conferences, where he has also been a speaker at many of them, a large number of them, where he shared his vast knowledge with the maritime and logistics industry on various related topics. Thank you, Soumya, for joining us today. What we are going to do today is, first, we asked our Dr. Arun Kasi, the author and a professor, to take us through a small presentation, say 15, 16 minutes, Dr. Kasi. Tell us more about General Average, and thereafter we will engage our panelists in discussions and also encourage our participants. Just for the participants, please put your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. We don't want to miss your fantastic questions, and in chat box, we won't be able to capture them. So thank you so much, and over to you, Dr. Arun Kasi.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Maka, for this opportunity and for the very kind introduction. Okay, I will use my slides. I will share them now with the share screen. Okay, I will give a very general and quick introduction to General Average. I'm not going to go into too much of details, but a general introduction to General Average, and that will be followed by the panel discussion and Q&A. Okay, Basically, in a nutshell, what is general average? I mean, some of us in the participants today will be very familiar with general average, but I will make the presentation also for novices who are not familiar with general average. Okay, general average is we can say it's basically a concept of mutual insurance that came very long ago before all the commercial insurances came about. And that is a mutual insurance among the parties to a common maritime adventure. Okay. Then what is actually a maritime adventure? In fact, every sea voyage is a maritime adventure. I once remember someone asked me, cargo is being carried on ship. Is that an adventure? I said, certainly, yes. You talk to a captain, you will hear the stories. You see the ship departing in calm seas from the loading port and arriving at the destination port in calm seas. But you don't know what the ship and the captain is going through and the crew is going through on the voyage. So every voyage is an adventure. I think those experienced in sea will not have a doubt on that. Anyway, for legal purposes and for general average purposes, definitely a sea voyage is a maritime adventure. And when we say common maritime adventures, who are the parties involved in the maritime adventures? It can be of course, it will be the ship owner, the cargo owners. On top of that, there can be also other people involved in it. For example, a time charterer may be entitled to a freight, and he may lose the freight when the cargo is lost. If his entitlement to the freight arises only on true and complete delivery. So he will lose his freight when the cargo is not delivered. So if the cargo sinks, say, with a ship or is jettisoned, he is losing his freight. So he's also a party to the maritime adventure. He has a stake in the maritime adventure. So this way, there can be many interests involved in a common maritime adventure, that is a sea voyage. Okay, and generally how it works is that in order for you to claim that there is a general average, there must be a danger, and at the time of a danger, one party has to make a sacrifice or to make an expenditure that must be to preserve the property in danger in the common maritime adventure. Okay, this is a very classical and common law position of what is general average. But however, later you will see under the York Annual rules, actually the scope has been enlarged. And sometimes, when you make a sacrifice or do a spending, even in a time which is not danger, and even not for the purpose of preserving the property in danger, still that can be a general average under the York Annual rules. That is, York Annual rules is completely a contractual thing. For example, you perform temporary repairs. That will be claimable, that can be claimable under the York Annual rules under the general average. Although under the common law, a temporary repair may not qualify as a general average, because a temporary repair in a port of refuge is not done in the time of danger. And that is not done to preserve the property in danger. And why we do a temporary repair? Because we want to continue with the voyage. So by an enlarged definition of general average by the York Annual rules, that also is allowed under general average. But as I said, we will start with the common law position, then we'll go into the contractual position, which is in fact an enlarged and expanded position of the common law. Okay. And once a party makes a sacrifice or makes an expenditure in that way, then he is entitled to a contribution from other stakeholders in the maritime adventure in proportion to the value saved for them. And the others can be, if a ship is making a sacrifice, the others can be the cargo. It can also be those like charterers entitled to a freight at the end of the voyage. So they all will be making, they all will, their things may be safe, their cargo or freight may be safe because the ship owner made a sacrifice. So now the ship owner will be entitled to a proportionate contribution from the other interests. So this is what is basically a general average. Let me give some examples. Now, I'll say more like a theory form what is a general average, but to better understand it, we have to give some examples. Say an engine breaks down during a voyage. So now what the ship owner will do, he has to incur the towage cost to tow the ship to a place of safety. If he doesn't do it, the ship is at a risk and all the cargo is at risk. So now he is incurring the towage cost for the benefit of all the stakeholders. And this, the cost that he incurs will be a general average cost. That is, a towage cost will be a general average cost. And he will make a claim against the cargo and possibly against even the charterers entitled to freight for a contribution in general average. Another example will be a grounding. So a ship grounds. Okay, when a ship grounds, the ship will need to be refloated. So the cost of refloating is a general average cost. But there is a distinction. When the ship grounds, the damage caused by grounding itself is not general average because that is an accident. But after that, when the owner tries to refloat the ship and he incurs a cost of refloating, maybe incurs some towage cost, and maybe even in attempt to refloat, he damages his ship. His equipments or propellers are damaged. And all these damages are general average damages, but not the original damage caused by the grounding itself. So only when you do something to save, that becomes a general average loss. Okay, and another common incident can be piracy. And if a ship is hijacked by pirates, a ransom has to be practically paid to release the ship and the cargo. And that will be also a general average contribution. Because why the ship owner is spending this, or some insurer for the ship owner is spending this? To save the ship and the cargo. And there have been cases also, when time is lost during negotiation of the ransom amount, that also is claimable. Okay. Then fire. If there is a fire incident, say water is doused to put out the fire, and the water damages the ship and the cargo. Okay, the damage by the water to the ship and the cargo is a general average loss. But the original damage by fire is not. And the classical example, jettison. I mean, today we don't, so often see jettison. So I put it as a last thing, although that is the most classical example given of general average. That is, if some cargo, if a ship is carrying 100 containers, if say 10 containers has to be jettisoned into the sea to save the rest of the 90 containers and the ship, now the owners of the 10 containers who lost their cargo for the benefit of the others will be entitled to claim in general average. Okay, with this introduction, we will go a little more into the general average. Okay, when we say general average, basically the law we can say is common law. And for you to make a claim under common law, there is not a need for there to be any contract. So for example, typically in the jettison case, let us say there are 2 cargo owners. In our earlier example, the owners of the 10 containers have lost their cargo. So they want to make a claim against the owners of the other 90 containers. There is no contract between the owners of the 10 containers and the 90 containers. But that doesn't matter. Under common law, they can still make a claim because this is a matter of law. General average, the person who lost is entitled to contribution. Okay, and there is also a statute on this, that is in particular section 66 of Marine Insurance Act 1906, that quite codifies the common law with some small changes. One of the important changes that the statute brought about was that the sacrifice or the expenditure must be reasonable for you to make a claim. Under common law, that requirement was not found. Okay, now we know a common law statute is going to be quite similar. And now we come to the contractual general average. This is a very wide concept, and that is why we have the very popular York and Webb rules. And if you see charter parties, bills of lading, practically you will always find York and Webb rules is contractually incorporated. So, and then York and Webb rule then is going to govern the general average between the parties. So then you don't have to rely on common law. You don't have to rely on the narrower things under the statute. You rather rely on a contractual general average, which is usually much wider than common law or statute. Okay. And having said all these, practically who are going to pay for the general average? I mean, you are a cargo owner. Are you going to pay? Practically, you are a cargo owner. Your cargo insurer is going to pay for your general average. You are a ship owner. Your H&M insurer is going to pay. But having said that, an interesting thing is that the reality is that many times cargo is not insured. Importers, I've seen very times, they actually very like, they think nothing will happen, you put the cargo on the loading port, definitely it will come to the destination port. So they're so relaxed and they don't insure the cargo. When they don't insure the cargo, if a general average falls in, they are going to pay from their pocket. And not only paying from pocket, to have the cargo released, they have to give a bond and they have to support the bond with a cash deposit. An estimated deposit to the general average adjuster before the cargo will be released. So all these burden they are going to take. Whereas if they have an insurance, and the cargo owner will still put in the bond to agree to pay whatever the right amount of general average to be adjusted later. But the cargo insurer will then put in a guarantee that the amount will be paid. So the cargo will be released. So then there's no need for a cash deposit. So this is cargo insurance in many aspects is very important, but although practically I've seen many importers actually underestimate the importance of cargo insurance. Okay. Yeah. We will very quickly look at the section 66 definition of general average. It's going to be a very good start to understand general average very well. Okay. It defines general average, to say it very briefly in this way. There is a General Average Act where any extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure is voluntarily and reasonably made or incurred in time of peril for the purpose of preserving the property in peril in the common adventure. As I said earlier, this is similar to common law definition, except that the requirement of reasonableness is not in the common law. And I also earlier said the other one, the contractual one, is generally much wider under the York and Webb rules. And I earlier said also the temporary repairs are allowed normally under the York and Webb rules. Okay, York and Webb rules is extremely popular in general average. That came in 1890 and that went through numerous versions and updating and editions, and finally today we are at 2016 version. But you will still find in the bills of lading or charter parties earlier versions of York and Webb rules are referred to, like 1974, 1994. They are still being referred to. Although personally I feel one should follow 2016 because this has been updated based on all the experience. Okay. And the structure of the York and Webb rules is that there are 7 lettered rules. They are called the general principles from A to G. And we have 23 Roman numbered rules, which are the specific applications from 1 to 23 in Roman letters. And in addition to these 30 rules, we also have 2 further rules, which are the rule of interpretation and rule paramount. Okay. The rule of interpretation says that if there is an inconsistency between the law and the York and Webb rules, York and Webb rules prevails. This is something quite not the norm in law, because normally when a law comes in, the law will say the law will always prevail and not a contract. But here we have the other way around. The contract will prevail over a common law. And this is well accepted. That means if we don't agree to anything, then only the common law kicks in. And also it says that if there's an inconsistency between the lettered rules, that is the general principles, and the number rules, the specific rules, then the number rules, the specific ones, will prevail over the general ones. Again, this is something normal. You have a specific thing that should prevail against a normal one if there is an inconsistency. Okay, and then we come to the rule paramount, and rule paramount says one thing: the expenditure or sacrifice must be reasonably made. If not, no general average. So the reasonableness has been planted strongly into this. But you will see it's already actually there already in the statute, that is the 1906 Act. Okay, having said this, before I move on, we need to be clear of one thing, and I've seen this was a common confusion. York and Webb rules is not a law. It's merely a standard set of rules available for parties to contractually incorporate. So it's up to them to incorporate or not, up to them to also modify if they want when they incorporate. That is not a law. But only when they parties incorporate it into their contract, a bill of lading or charter party, then only it gets the force. But practically, almost always it is incorporated. Okay, when you're talking about general rule, I say there is one golden rule. I mean, I have not seen maybe perhaps so commonly the word golden rule being used, but I have been using this. The golden rule is that no recovery, no contribution. So at the end of the day, you don't get your things, your ship or your cargo, you don't have any liability to contribute. Although before the end of the day, there was some general average act done or general average sacrifice made, that doesn't matter. You won't be liable to contribute unless you get your goods or your ship at the end. And there was one interesting case on this Chiliu, on this rule of no recovery, no contribution. Here, a general average expenditure was made at a port of refuge. So there is already general average done. So the ship owner will be having a comfort, okay, then I will get my contribution. But before it reaches the destination, the ship sank with the cargo. So no cargo reaches the destination. So now can the ship owner claim a general average expenditure for whatever he spent in the port of refuge? The answer is no, because the cargo did not get their cargo. And another case also that will put down this rule of no recovery, no contribution is Contractual Chapter. In this case, there were multiple unsuccessful attempts were made to refloat a ship. And finally, a successful attempt was made. And the court held, in fact, the ship owner is entitled to a general average contribution for all the attempts, whether successful or unsuccessful, because at the end, there was a successful attempt. Supposing at the end, there was no successful attempt, then the ship owner will not be able to claim for the unsuccessful attempts made. Yeah. And it is said that general average goes independently of the underlying cause. So you don't have to actually, when we are talking about general average, you don't have to really go in and find who is at fault, this and that. I mean, there can be a general statement, but practically we will still find who is at fault. Okay, let me give an example. I think I can best say how this works with an example. Say a ship is unseaworthy at the beginning of the voyage because of the fault of the ship owner. So the ship owner did not exercise due diligence to make his ship seaworthy. And this is generally a breach of the ship owner's basic duties. So now the ship is unseaworthy, and due to that, the ship catches a fire during the voyage. And now the crew extinguishes the fire and douses water. And the water now damages some cargo. And also say it damages some parts of the ship. Okay, now, we have no doubt that the damage caused by fire is not a general average loss. But the damage caused by the water douse is a general average loss. So now the cargo can, of course, can claim the general average loss, but what about the ship owner? Because the ship owner is the one who did not maintain the ship in a seaworthy condition, and because of this, all this happened. So basically, it may look like the ship owner can claim in general average, but at the end of the day, the ship owner will be liable to also compensate the cargo for unseaworthiness of the ship by the same amount. So at the end of the day, what will happen is that the damaged cargo can claim general average from the ship owner, but the ship owner will not be able to claim general average contribution from the cargo because by fault of the ship owner, the whole incident happened. The cargo has a claim from the ship owner for whatever general average contribution they have to pay. So you will see it's actually a two crossing. So they have to pay and they can get. So it comes to finally zero. I have to pay you $10. You have to pay me $10. So it comes to zero. And there was one interesting case, Lady M. In this case, a chief engineer set fire deliberately to his own ship. So the question was, and due to the fire, there was a breakdown and the ship had to be towed. So now the question is, the towage cost, is it recoverable in general average contribution? The cargo will naturally argue, is your engineer, he set fire, I mean, how can you claim? And the court held actually the ship owner can claim because although it was the fault of the chief engineer, was the ship owner liable for that? Because if you look at the Hague-Visby rules, the ship owner will not be liable for a damage by fire unless the owner or the carrier was involved in it by his own privity or by his actual fault. Here to this fire incident, he was not a privy, and it was not his actual fault. It was the fault of the chief engineer. So the court held then this is not an actionable fault. So when it is not an actionable fault, the ship owner can still claim in general average. But if it is an actionable fault like unseaworthiness, then the ship owner won't be able to claim in general average. I know these things are going to be a little difficult, but I'm trying to just give a broad idea. Later when we go to the panel discussion and to the Q&As, these things will be made clearer. But for now, I just want to give you a broad idea, although they can be a little difficult concepts. Okay, and another interesting thing is that the common maritime adventure can be actually different for different groups of interest. Okay, I will best do this with an example. Okay, I just need to check that I'm within time. Mr. Baka, am I within time or running out of time?
All I can say is you're very interesting. You can take 5 minutes extra.
Oh, I'm most thankful for this. Okay, this is actually an example that I've developed. I believe this is actually a very interesting example that will give a very broad idea of general average. So what I call the different common for different groups. Okay, let me give this example, and we can only do this, understand this with this example. A ship carries cargoes belonging to 3 cargo interests. First incident happens. The master lightens a ship in danger of foundry by jettisoning jettisoning one of the cargoes. That is cargo number 1. He completely jettisoned the cargo to lighten the ship. This is a general average sacrifice by cargo number 1. So now the ship goes with cargo number 2 and 3. The ship continues the voyage. Okay, now a second incident happens. So this must be a very unfortunate ship. Second incident happened. The ship now grounds, and the master refloats the ship by straining the propellers, and this causes a damage to the hull and machinery. So now you will see this is a general average sacrifice of the ship. That is the damage by grounding is not the general average sacrifice, but the damage caused by the refloating is a general average sacrifice. Okay, now the ship continues the voyage. Okay, a third incident happens. The ship catches a fire, and the entire cargo number 2 is burned down. So there's a total loss of cargo number 2. Okay, and this is not a general average sacrifice of the cargo number 2. The reason is that the fire is an accident. So that was not done to save anything. So this is not a general average sacrifice of cargo number 2. And the ship now continues the voyage with cargo number 3 only. So now we have in the maritime adventure, we have only the ship and the cargo number 3. Can you see at different point of time, we have different interests sitting on the common maritime adventure. Okay, so finally the ship reaches with cargo number 3 only. So how are we going to do our general average now? Okay, cargo 1 was lost because of the jettison. So now cargo 1 actually was lost, to save the ship and the other cargo. So cargo 1 now will be entitled to a contribution from the ship and cargo number 3. And of course, the cargo number 1 also has to put in its portion of the contribution. But do you see here, cargo number 2 is left out here. Because cargo number 2 finally, although at the earlier point it was safe, but finally cargo number 2 did not reach the line. So cargo number 2 is excluded from general average contribution. So you will remember our golden rule: no recovery, no contribution. Okay, and then let us see who are the contributors to the damage to the ship that was caused due to refloating. Okay, of course, the ship itself has to contribute the ship's portion, and cargo number 3 that finally landed will contribute. But cargo number 2, of course, will not contribute because the cargo number 2 did not see the line. And you will see cargo number 1 is also excluded from the list of contributors because after the jettison, cargo number 1, although cargo number 1 will get the contribution because for the jettison, but after the jettison, cargo number 1 is no longer part of the common maritime adventure. So you are seeing, when the incident happened, at that time, who are the parties to the common maritime adventure? And this kind of actually is going to be a very complex thing. So I was just showing a simple example. So you need to actually then see at the relevant time who are the parties to the common maritime adventure. And of course, cargo number 2 is always excluded from everything because no cargo received. Okay, well then, thankfully I've completed, I believe, with a little extension by courtesy of Mr. Maka. So I'm done, Mr. Maka. I will hand over the mic to you now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arun. I think this was quite an interesting and exhaustive. I've learned a lot from this. One question I had in my mind to ask you, but I think you have very well covered in your presentation. That was in terms of the temporary repairs, which you very well already answered. So let me come to Raymond to start the panel discussion. We know, Raymond, that the general average cases, it is necessary to establish the general average community, which is quite obvious with the presence of cargo on board the ship, as Arun mentioned and giving fantastic examples. But what about when the ship is proceeding in ballast? What happens in that case?
Yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, I must mention that there are some countries, like the USA, the Common Maritime Adventure does not depend on the number of interests at all. Insofar as a GA Act, they will have GA. But let's go back to the real life. Most cases, where the vessel is proceeding in ballast, there are 3 circumstances. One, the vessel is proceeding not under any charter at all. So the ship is the only interest. There's no common interest. And the second circumstance is where the vessel is proceeding under voyage charter. Proceeding under voyage charter, the voyage charter freight to be earned, at least at the time of the accident or occurrence giving rise to general average, would be a contributing interest there. So there's a common maritime adventure. And the third category would be where the vessel is proceeding under time charter. And we know that the bunkers usually under time charter party is owned by the time charterer. So the bunkers would be a contributing interest. And so go back to the first one, the vessel in ballast, not under charter. So ships only interest. For the US law, no problem. Insofar that GA Act is GA, then that's still a general average. But for the otherwise, I think we'll have to look to the insurance policy. We all know that most vessels got their insurance. And I think the clauses commonly used would be the British ITC or, particular Institute Time clauses hull. And therein, or including the international hull clauses, there's a provision that where the vessel is proceeding in ballast, not under charter at all, there's still, GA would be acceptable by underwriters, and the voyage, the maritime adventure, would end when the vessel arrived at the first port, which is not the bunkering port or the port of refuge. So that's general average for the shipowners to claim under the insurance terms. Okay. On the other one, choose the vessel under charter, voyage charter or time charter. Then for policy, again, subject to English law and practice, there's a rule of practice of the Association of Average Adjuster, Rule B26, which make clear provision that for the voyage charter, yes, the voyage charter freight to be earned we have to contribute if that's successful, as Doctor mentioned. But the voyage for that will be up to the from the port, the place of departure of the vessel until the first port, discharging port upon arrival. That's the common maritime adventure for the vessel under voyage charter. And the contributing interests are the vessel basically and the voyage charter freight. And for the vessel proceeding under time charter, again, as I mentioned, bunkers are contributing interest. The voyage would end when the vessel arrived the first loading port. The vessel proceeding by loading port. And that's provided by the rule of practice, which we've been using for years. And I would just like to mention that this rule B26, has just been reviewed by the Association of Average Adjuster, and in May they produce a probationary rule, which will run for 1 year. So next May, when at the general meeting of the Association of Average Adjuster, that will be a voting and get that rule passed. But basically, that's actually, insofar personally, that's been according to my practice throughout. But certain stage, there's some difference in opinion among the average adjuster, and the market would like us to make, they don't mind pay or not pay, or how much they're going to pay, but we have to be uniform. So that's that rule being revised to make sure that we are all working according to the rule uniformly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You mentioned about, like the different opinions between two different average adjusters. So I am not going to start a fight between you two, but I would like to know, Dr. Kasi mentioned about, it's a calm seas when the ship leaves the load port. It's the calm seas when the ship arrives at the discharge port. In between every voyage is an adventure. What about a tanker like the FPSO, or there's a storage tanker with cargo? That's not sailing ship. Will that be a common adventure in that case?
Oh, that's we all know that General Average derived from maritime law. So it got to be maritime. And this tanker or vessel, which been permanently used as a storage, I mean, there's no voyage at all, no adventure at all. I mean, you have cargo on board being stored there. You can say that that's common, that's cargo and ship, but it's nothing maritime. It's just like a warehouse where we have different types of cargo there in, and there's a fire, and there's a water damage to extinguish the fire causing to the cargo, and the cargo cannot claim GA contribution because General Average does not apply to other than maritime. And similarly, I mean, a vessel acting as a permanent storage, there's no maritime adventure, I call it. That's common adventure, but not common maritime adventure. Of course, there are some other exceptions. Very different. We have to deal with each case on its merit. I think.
What about Rui and Arun? What would you like to comment on that? There could be rolling, pitching. There could be movement of the ship, making it maritime. The buildings ashore don't move like that.
Let's make it even more simple. Say if there's somehow there's a bomb, boom, and hit the storage, the vessel as a storage tanker or whatever, with the cargo also damaged and requires salvage. Okay, clearly the cargo and the goods stored on board the vessel, and the vessels they are definitely in danger. So that's salvage. But we would deal with that as a pure salvage, and not General Average as we would do it in common usual cases where there's a common maritime adventure, because General Average won't recognize this being a common maritime adventure.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Captain Patnaik, many a times we do hear, from the cargo interest that they contracted to get their cargo from A to B, they are paying the freight. Then why should they be penalized, like just because you have exceptions in the Hague-Visby rules, et cetera, and they say, why should we be penalized something that owner has not done properly? And now we are being asked to contribute towards the general average. So what's a practitioner's view from your experience?
No, I think Dr. Kasi and Mr. Raymond have highlighted very clearly that it is a maritime adventure at the end of the day. The ship has to reach safely a port for the cargo to be delivered to the consignee, right? So if the ship is imperiled during the passage by any of the maritime perils, then the cargo cannot be delivered. So this is something which is known to a cargo owner before the voyage commences. Of course, the ship has to be seaworthy. That is the implied warranty under Marine Insurance Act, also Carriage of Goods by Sea Act. Both very clearly specify that the ship has to be seaworthy before commencement of voyage. If that is there, then yes, I think the cargo interest has to contribute and to the maritime, to the general average. And plus, if you see all bill of ladings, they have your York Antioch rule and New Jason clause, both, where it sort of very clearly states that cargo interest has to contribute for general average contribution by the ship owner. So I think it is the basic thing is that it's a maritime adventure, and the ship has to go through the difficult terrains of the sea voyage for the smooth carriage of the cargo to the other side and to be delivered.
Right. So basically, it's a sacrifice for the common good for every party.
Yes.
So one question I had over here was, which Dr. Kasi mentioned so well. People don't take insurance. I've been thinking that nothing will go wrong, and 95% of the times maybe nothing goes wrong. But then the 5% of the time when things do go wrong. Recently, I had a case. I asked the client, "Do you have insurance?" He says, "No, we don't have insurance." "Why did you not take?" "Oh, we were thinking about taking the insurance, but somehow we didn't take." So I think having insurance in place is extremely important as a practice. And cost of insurance is cost of doing business, and covers your exposure. Rui, I'm seeing that you're quite sitting quietly there, so I have to trouble you a bit. What type of interest might we see in common maritime adventure in case of general average? There has been talk about the ship, cargoes, bunkers, freight, and a number of things: money, mail, passengers, luggage, etc., etc., etc. What is your opinion? What all does it contain?
Yeah, well, you're quite right, actually. And Dr. Aaron, Kazi, and Raymond both have actually mentioned the interest part. So essentially, any property which was on board the vessel at the time of the General Average Act and eventually benefited from the actions taken should be a party to the GA. And they should contribute to the General Average sacrifices, expenditures, on the basis of the values saved, which is the actual net values of the properties at the termination of the adventure. York County Rules, Rule 17, deals with the provisions in respect of contributive values of the properties and specific interests. For example, ship, that's quite obvious. It could be a sound or maybe damaged value upon arrival at the destination. Bunkers, whether owned by the ship owners or the time charterers, these bunkers were on board at the time of the General Average Act, and at the end remain on board at the destination. They should be brought into the General Average system. Obviously, all cargo on board, containers on board. In large GA cases, obviously, there would be many individual cargo interests to deal with. And freight at risk at the time of the General Average Act. Obviously, if freight was prepaid, it would not contribute as a separate interest, and it would be included in usually the cargo value. As you have mentioned, your County Rules deals with some specific provisions that mails and passengers' luggage and accompanied personal effects and private motor vehicles, these should not be brought in to contribute to General Average. They're often very low value items, and it's very difficult to accurately value these items. Some other ones I can think of, maybe leased equipment, more unusual items like banknotes or bullion, specie, stocks in shops. In theory, they should be brought in to contribute. What should not be brought in lives, passengers' lives, crews' lives, these just very difficult to quantify. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Mr. Mark, I think you need to unmute.
You're muted.
That's the most common thing which happens when you're doing these webinars. You know, the most common question must go to the Guinness Book of Records. So we have Mr. Norman Lopez. He is from our Australia-New Zealand branch of the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers. He's just put a question for Dr. Kasi. Would you like to alert the attendees to the outcome of the most recent case on General Average and the General Average contributions by cargo receivers? It's talking about the Polar case.
Polar, it must be the Polar.
Yeah, so just take a couple of minutes, and if you can tell all of us, please.
Sure. In fact, Polar was a very interesting case and was a very, I will say, a novel case. In Polar case, there was a charter party, and to say it very briefly, I mean, it's actually quite a long judgment. To say it very briefly, the charterer agreed to pay the kidnap and ransom insurance premium and also some additional war risk premium, which also talks about piracy and ransom. So basically, the risk of piracy and any ransom payment, the insurance cost is going to be borne by the charterer. And the charterer paid. I mean, in fact, there was a limit of $40,000, and to the limit they paid, and the cost was nothing more than $40,000. So when the charterers paid, then we will see the bills of lading incorporate the charter party. So it was a voyage charter party that was incorporated into the bills of lading. So what happened then? Finally, when there's a general average incident happens, like what happened in the case, piracy and a ransom had to be paid. The ship owner has paid. I mean, the ship owner's insurance has paid. Whom are they going to go after for the general average contribution? They are going to go after the cargo interest. Cargo interest here will mean the bill of lading holders and not really the charter party. So actually, we see overall it's a bit funny. You know, the charterers are relieved from general average contribution because they pay the premium, but they're not the one who are going to pay the contribution. The cargo interest is going to pay. I mean, in that case, actually, quite interestingly, if you look at it, there were 6 bills of lading. And the charterer, all the 6 bills were held by, say, company X. And the charterer was company Y. In fact, X and Y were related companies. They could have made the charterer himself the bill of lading holder. I mean, when we have a charterer himself bill of lading holder, the bill of lading doesn't speak. Only the charter party will speak. I mean, that is a settled law. So only if the charter party speaks, then the bill of lading holder will be entitled to all the benefits of the charter party provisions. Okay, in that case, the court did not have a doubt that under the charter party, the charterers are relieved from liability to pay general average contribution because they agreed to pay the premium and they pay the premium. I mean, if not, why is there a provision like, they have to pay the premium for the piracy? So they are relieved, there's no doubt. But the only question there was whether this provision, this relief was incorporated into the bill of lading. So the bill of lading had a general incorporation and a very wide incorporation clause saying that actually everything in the charter party is incorporated. So, and the Court of Appeal, in fact, agreed that the bill of the voyage charter party terms were incorporated into the bill of lading, but the Court of Appeal decided that they will not manipulate the words to say that bill of lading holder is relieved. So they say even when you incorporate, what happens is that the charter is relieved from the liability to pay GA contribution, but not the bill of lading holder. So finally, what happened? The bill of lading holder had to end up paying the general average contribution. So to cut the long story short, when the charter party has this kind of KENA policy premium clause that is called a complete code, the charter is relieved from GA contribution, but the bill of lading holder is not relieved, even if the bill of lading is incorporated. Bill of lading incorporates the charter party. I mean, if you want the bill of lading holder to be relieved, then some clearer terms must be put into the bill of lading to say, including the liability to contribute in general average for ransom payments. So you have to do something like that. Or another way, make the charterer and the bill of lading holder the same person, then your bill of lading doesn't speak at all. Charter party only going to speak, and you are relieved from your liability. So that was actually a very unique case. Mr. Maka, you need to unmute.
Unmute again.
So again, the same thing, it should be automatic. The moment I open my mouth, it should unmute. Okay, this is a question for Captain Patnaik. It's a very basic question that I'm asking, because after this, I'm going to move on to the little bit in advance. I'm going to move on to the question and answers from the audience. They have fantastic questions. I've got the question box in front of me. Sir, what exactly is a GA adjustment? If you can just give an example. Why particularly I'm asking you is I would like to know from our perspective, from the commercial guy's perspective, and not from the lawyers and average adjusters perspective.
I think Mr. Makari asked a very complicated question to be answered in a very simple manner. So we have veterans like Dr. Arun Kasi and Mr. Raymond who have highlighted how complex is this entire exercise of general average adjustment. But I'll just try to put it in a very simple and nutshell manner. But fact of the matter is that it's a settlement between your underwriters, hull and machinery underwriters, cargo underwriters, P&A clubs, and of course average adjusters who sort of go through a lot of process in arriving at what the expenses are and who has to contribute what. And as also sort of suggested by my fellow panelists, so you have sacrifices, you have expenses, both. So they come under this category of General Average Act. So sacrifices like your jettisoning of cargo to float vessel when the ship runs aground. Expenses could be towage and salvage expenses to tow the ship or damaged ship to the port of refuge expenses, lightening of cargo to sister vessel to lighten the ship or to take the ship to a dock. So these are all expenses which can occur. And just to give a very simple example, now suppose the ship value is $40 million, the cargo value is $50 million, and the freight is $6 million. So total is $100 million of asset which is moving and carrying the cargo. And you had an expense of $6 million as general average expense or contribution. So then your general average value comes to 6%. Now, if there is a cargo owner who has a value of cargo worth $12 million, then his contribution will be 6% of 12 million. And if there is a time charter who has got a bunker of say $500,000, so it will be 6% of $500,000. So that is a very simplistic way of understanding how it works. But in true sense, it doesn't work like that. It's a very, very complicated calculation. And what I was told by my underwriter friends is that it is sometimes very difficult for a ship owner to really prove that the ship was seaworthy when it commences the voyage. And most cases, I was told the cargo underwriters will try to prove that the ship was not seaworthy, especially in fire cases, as we heard earlier, or even for cargo damage cases. So ultimately, it ends up under a liability cover where the P&A club has to step in and pay a small amount, which is not covered by the H&M underwriters. So all three have to pool in to ultimately contribute. It's not that always, as many people know, it's a settlement between H&M and cargo underwriters. But in cases where there's a big dispute between cargo underwriters and H&M underwriters, that's where it becomes a liability claim for the ship owner, and then it comes under the purview of a liability claim under P&I, and the P&A club steps in to settle that. And there is something also for the viewers to know. It's called a hull and machinery absorption clause, whereby you need not get into the entire gamut of this average settlement, and you sort of agree on a figure of, let's say, $350,000 as my absorption value, and then the ship owner can decide it's a small expense that we will do away with settlement or with average adjustment, and then the underwriter pays his entire amount and closes the issue. So not many know about it, but the hull and machinery cover has this, and if the ship owner wants to exercise this, then they will not get into this entire exercise of average adjustment.
Thank you very much, Captain Patnaik. Now, the questions which I'm going to take from the audience, they are not directly, unless the audience themselves have directed towards a particular panelist, I will take the name. Otherwise, please feel free to answer. Rui, yourself, Raymond, Captain Patnaik, and Dr. Kasi. We have this question from Mr. Deepak Gupta. If a wrong declaration of cargo is made, He says with consequences. Is that also covered under the GA? Or is it not very clear?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
It says if the wrong declaration, if the cargo is wrongly declared, right, and then something happens, so is that also covered under GA? Would they be, you know, like other people will have to, they contribute, and the person whose cargo is wrongly declared, he also gets the contribution towards his loss?
Maybe wrongly declare the value, so for instance, the value of the cargo, they wrongly declare. That's general average. They still have to contribute the cargo based on the actual net arrived value of the cargo. But where his cargo is sacrificed, allowable in general average, probably the allowance will be based on the value they wrongly declare. I thought that's included in the York-Emerald rules, which I haven't have a copy.
It is covered in the York-Emerald rules,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
But yeah, well, obviously, wrongly declared, I would presume that the cargo value would be less than its actual value, usually.
Exactly.
So when it's sacrificed, it should be contributed based on the wrong value. But when it should be contributing to others' general average losses and expenditures, then it should be based on the actual value, not the purposely wrongly declared value. Yeah.
This sometimes really happen, where in particular the government's the weapon, for instance, they will never declare the correct value for confidential reason. That's very difficult. But thank God I haven't come across that sort of case.
Oh, I see. But it's good to see that in the York and Webb rules, this has been thought about and some sort of remedy has been provided. This is specifically for Dr. Kasi from Ritesh Kaushik, where he says that if a master deliberately grounds his ship to save it from colliding with another ship, does the damage caused to the ship while grounding will be covered under the GA?
It's a very interesting question, Samaka. Okay,
It's come from a lawyer himself.
Yes, good to hear that. My view is that it will be, because the master is grounding the ship in a time of peril to save the ship and the cargo. Because if he doesn't, he will collide, and then there could be a damage and in fact an issue of safety to the common adventure. So he is doing it in time of peril to save the common interest. So that should be covered under the general average. So this is different from a normal case whereby accidentally he grounds. Accidental grounding, that damage will not be covered. But this damage must be covered. I mean, that's my view. Different people may have different views.
Yeah, that's the voluntary stranding. That's covered by the York-Emerald rules.
Your opinion?
And that will include the cost of refloating, the damage sustained refloating, in effort to refloat the vessel. That include that as well.
But Dr. Kasi, there has to be a peril first. So for him to aground the ship or intentionally try to aground the ship, right? So the question is not very clear. Was it done at the time of a peril, or it was otherwise?
So he says that if the master deliberately grounds a ship to save it from colliding with another ship, so there is a peril. If he had not done that, there would be a collision.
No, I don't think so, because I think the collision doesn't come under peril. I think it's a navigational judgmental error. So I think under Marine Insurance Act, it will not come under general average, if I'm not mistaken, because there has to be a peril. I think it's very clear. The adventure has to be imperiled for it, and then only it will kick in. So I mean, just to sort of avoid collision, I think there are certain perils listed in Marine Insurance Act. It has to be part of one of those perils.
So what do the experts feel?
We have to,
Well, Well, the point is actually touched on, mentioned in the York County Rules, Rule 5, voluntary stranding. Basically, when a ship is purposely or intentionally run on shore for the purpose of common safety, of course, then the consequential loss or damage to the property involved in the adventure should be allowed in general average. I think that is the purpose of the rule, to specifically deal with situations where the masters have to deal with a very difficult situation and to basically beach the vessel and to avoid the vessel sinking or getting into more difficult troubles, and the damage caused thereby should theoretically be brought into the general average system. Raymond?
Well, I tend to agree with Captain that for the situation, the circumstances mentioned make it difficult, but we have to consider the merits, whether actually the intentional act by the master at that time, the vessel and the cargo were in the position of peril. It's quite different from a situation where there's a collision, and then our vessel sustained serious damage, running with the risk of sinking. Then the master deliberately grounded the vessel. That's a clear case. But in the case you mentioned, could be the master judged wrongly. But we have to consider the situation. Insofar, we can satisfy that the act, at the time of the act of the master, the vessel and the cargo were in a position of danger.
Yes.
I will add on to say that even under the common law, unlike a statute, we don't have a real boundary. So the thing is that whether the master is doing something to save the vessel in danger. So we are going to can look at it more broadly, but of course that's going to turn on exactly the circumstances in which the master did the action and the reasonableness. I mean, although strictly reasonableness may not be a criteria, but I think that will somehow or other come in. And of course, here we need to remember that there's possibly a third party involved, because another vessel involved. It could be the fault of the another vessel that pushed this vessel to ground, and the other vessel owner might also be liable. So there might be a recovery from there. So in that sense, any loss may be also reduced. So in the real circumstances, it's going to be a lot more to think.
Yeah, yes, right. The actual circumstances have to be considered, and you're probably aware that the master's, he, in a very famous case, and popular case, where the master saw some smoke coming out from the ventilator. He thought that there was fire, and so poured water into the cargo hold and damaged the cargo. Upon arrival at destination, open up, actually there's no sign of fire at all. That means the vessel and the cargo will never be in peril. It's merely the master's judgment. There's no GA in that circumstances. Maybe that's rather odd, but what I meant is each case got to be considered on the merits. The common safety issue is important.
Right. Okay. Very quickly, there's a question here from Dr. Saxena. In a cattle carrier, will the cattle owner contribute? So the cargo is cattle. It's a cattle carrier. So will the cattle owner contribute? Would it be taken as the owner of the cargo?
Technically, he's a cargo owner. So I mean, the bill of lading will be signed as he is the cargo owner. So I think he should contribute.
Okay. And for Rui, for you, I have a question from Mr. Jeffrey Blum, who is the president of BIVA. Okay, just for everyone, Amy O'Neill could not join us today. So her colleague, Mr. Rui Howe, somehow he had the login under Amy's name. So he's not Mr. O'Neill, he's Mr. Rui Howe. All right. So Rui mentioned that minor cargoes of little value will not contribute to GA. What of the famous examples of a liner shipment with very many cargoes, which were saved, and the average adjusters took 3 years to determine the GA contribution of $1 by the owner of one of the boxes of French paid de foie gras. My God, Jeff, you had to come out with this, which was saved. Surely all parties owning property that is not lives in a common maritime adventure should contribute to GA. In other words, if GA applies. So what do you think? Do you agree with Jeffrey?
Well, I'm not quite sure about the case, but as I said, in principle, all properties on board the vessel should be brought in. But in practice, sometimes when we deal with a very large GA case, a container ship GA case, we need to calculate the potential. We need to estimate the percentage of contribution at the very early stage of the case, and we try to work out, how much money, how much time we need to put in from just collecting GA security and producing adjustment in respect of that one cargo interest. And if that cargo interest property is very low value, for example, it's only $100, but we expect we're going to spend $500 to do everything in respect to that cargo, then obviously it's not really for the benefit of all interests involved in this adventure for us to actually produce an adjustment and for the owners to collect contribution from these cargoes. So often we would just work out an estimate at the very beginning and say, okay, maybe we don't really have to collect security or collect contribution from these very low value property owners.
Right. Thank you. Arun, there's one question for you. Where the charter party says that charter will pay the kidnap and ransom insurance premium, is that a complete code relieving the charter from the obligation to contribute in GA for the ransom paid to the pirates?
Basically, the answer will be yes, because following Paula, when the charter party says so and the charterer makes a payment of the KNR policy, the charterer is relieved from his liability to pay GA contribution. In fact, this was when the High Court held this. High Court even referred to other 2 cases where similarly, but not in the context of ransom, but they were in the context of safe port warranty, when there's already an insurance clause covering that in the charter party, and the charterer agrees to pay the premium. The charterer is then relieved from GA contribution in respect to that. So that was EVR case and the Ocean Victory. So there has been actually a trend. If you look at it, the EVR, Ocean Victory, and Paula, there's been a trend. When charter party includes a provision dealing with it and one party to pay premium, then that is a complete code. That means you cannot go beyond the insurance fund to go against the party paying the premium. So this has already been a trend.
Anyone else would like to add to that?
I personally still prefer that the very clear wordings be used in the contract of carriage, whether charter party or bill of lading, making it sure that they are exempted. I mean, the ship owners agree to waive their right to GA contribution. I mean, for insurance premium, you pay the insurance premium, you don't know the terms of the insurance, whether that cover, provide the adequate cover.
Right.
I mean, to play safe only. I mean, I agree what he said with the support of the legal cases.
Okay, let me see a couple of questions also from the audience here. Some of it I think could be little bit, maybe they have typed it so quickly. If vessel is seaworthy, this is from Captain Mukesh Singh. If the vessel is seaworthy as per the checks carried out by the ship staff, but due to the negligence of the ship staff, say for example, they do not check things properly, and actually the vessel was found not seaworthy, will the GA apply if there is any incident during the voyage? I think you covered that a little bit, but no harm repeating it. It's a very important point. Let's say, Dr. Kasi?
Very well. Okay. The thing is that if the ship is okay, we are thinking of a scenario under the Hague rules or the Hague Visby rules. But if it is a common law, it can be slightly different. But typically, most of the time, it's going to be either Hague or Hague Visby rules when you're talking about seaworthiness. Okay, under Article 3.1, the carrier's obligation is to make sure that he exercises due diligence to ensure the ship is seaworthy at the beginning of the voyage. So now, but actually, from the example given, it's a bit hard to say, whether the ship was really seaworthy or not at the beginning. But in a real scenario, we have to actually look at all angles to see whether the ship is seaworthy at the beginning or not. Okay, when the crew is negligent, actually that can put the liability into the ship owner, because the ship owner cannot actually delegate his obligation to exercise due diligence. It's a non-delegable duty. So it's on the ship owner. So he has to make sure the ship is seaworthy. So when the crew is negligent, so actually it's going to finally fall on the head of the ship owner. And as long as the due diligence has not been exercised on behalf of the ship owner and the ship is unseaworthy, then the ship owner is going to be liable. But if it is a latent defect that no due diligence can find out, then he has to discharge his duty, and it's impossible to find out the defect. Then the ship is unseaworthy. Then the ship owner will be relieved if it is under the Hague or Hague Visby rules. But if it is under common law, it won't be released, because common law is an absolute duty to make sure the ship is seaworthy. But practically, as I said, we only come across Hague and Hague Visby rule scenario.
What happened in case of Rotterdam rules? Somebody went ahead and accepted the Rotterdam rules, paid extra premium to the club. He is properly covered. I'm already answering that part, that he is covered. The club is not going to say bye-bye to him. So what happens in case of Rotterdam rules where continuing seaworthiness is an obligation on the owner?
Well, I just feel if it is his obligation to ensure continuous seaworthiness, then he is bound by it. Then it becomes an actionable fault. The moment he doesn't ensure a continuous seaworthiness, at any point of time the ship is unseaworthy, that becomes an actionable fault. So we fall back then on York and Webb rules, particularly Rule D. When there's an actionable fault, then the ship owner will not be entitled to a contribution if he is at fault of an actionable fault. So it comes to that.
Okay, gentlemen. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry, I at this stage, I just want to make one point, is that the general average exists independent of insurance, also independent of the liability among the parties. What I mean is, first of all, we have to establish whether identify the GA situation, whether GA arises. Yes, GA arises. What are the allowances under, say, your rules, and contribution. That's it. And the liability aspect is quite separate. And whether the cargo can defend, and that's provided by Rule D. So for average adjuster for the ship owners to start with, is whether this general average we drop the adjustment, whether the cargo contribute have a defense or not, that's a different issue. Put the liability aside first. And of course, if the cargo successfully defend, the cargo's unrecovered cargo proportion of GA will be met by the P&I club usually.
Right. Thank you. And I think we are 2 minutes over the time. And still, I would request one minute from all my panelists. Something which kept on coming in what Dr. Kasi mentioned right in the beginning is the standardization of the contracts. That was one. Following the latest versions, so that the development of the case law over a period of time, that gets incorporated by the people who are revising these standard forms or standard rules, the so-called boilerplate clauses, etc. So keeping that in mind, how important it is. So in one minute, if you take, and then we will just wrap up this webinar. Let's start with Rui. How important it is to have standardized forms rather than keep changing clauses, make them homemade clauses.
Oh, well, you mean contracts of carriage in terms of general average provisions?
Yeah.
Well, it is very important. I mean, we look at the first thing when we have received a case instruction, we look at the bills of lading, we look at the work charter party, we look at the time charter party, we see whether there is a general average provision in any of these. Sometimes we get a very consistent provision throughout the charter chain. Sometimes we get very inconsistent ones, and we need to decide which one is the direct contract between the owners and the cargo. And I would only suggest that it makes our adjuster's life a lot easier if we see a consistent general average provision in the charter chain. And whether that be 94 rules, 74 rules, 2016 rules, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah. I think the question was on the importance of having a standardized form for terms for dealing with general average. I mean, absolutely, I think it is important, not only in general average, I think many aspects, on particularly in maritime things, we need standard things. The reason I'm saying is that even with the standard things, we see lawyers coming out with a very creative new arguments. Although these are standard forms and there are a wealth of precedents, the courts have decided how this particular word must be interpreted. But we see the lawyers will come out with very creative ideas to overcome that. And this happens with the standard form. If we don't have a standard form, and then imagine what then we are going to go through. And the cost of litigation is going to be the enormous, we'll endless fight on the words. And second thing, drafting, these kind of things are not easy. Easily drafting errors can happen, and inconsistencies and things may go meaningless. So don't take the risk, just follow a standard form that has been tested and there are precedents. Yeah.
Actually, nothing is perfect, to be sure. I mean, we have the different versions of York Emerald Rule. And somehow there's never been an agreement that when we have the 2016, then the 2004 is gone and all the preceding one gone. We still have the different versions. I still remember after 40 years adjusting, I still find a contract of carriage providing for GA according to York Emerald Rule 1924. Okay, we have, as the doctor said, we have a standard form. Let us, based on this form, all agree, or within the provision therein. The Longshore case is a typical example. And the previous cases like Mackis. I mean, what we've been doing in practice throughout the years could be different when it goes to court. Completely different. But at least I think the standardization of a certain form is, certain version is much better. Otherwise,
even in our charter parties, voyage, time charter parties, contracts of carry, COAs. So Captain Patnaik,
I don't think we have not seen much tampering with general average clause or York Anchor rules or New Jersey clause. I think these clauses are generally, they're not tampered with, and BIMCO comes out with newer versions of these clauses. But I don't think they're really tampered when we negotiate a charter party between the charterer, the owner or cargo interest and all that. So I think, yes, I do agree. Standardization is extremely essential. But from my experience, I've seen we generally don't touch upon these clauses. They're the clauses which are already there. We just see that it is there. Yeah. Yes, we don't really tamper with this clause.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much to all of you. Dr. Kasi, thank you. Captain Patnaik, and my dear teacher, Mr. Raymond Wong, and Rui Hao, thank you very much. And Sanjeev, thank you for starting the webinar, and Abhi giving us fantastic support. And with that, I think we will end this webinar. Just to tell all the attendees that on the 15th of December at 6 p.m. Hong Kong time, we are going to have the latest case, CMA CGM Libra, after the Supreme Court decision, whether it is as a carrier or as a navigator, qua carrier versus qua navigator, seaworthiness. How is it going to affect the future? In terms of us as ship owners, ship managers, what is seaworthiness? How we are going to be judged? What precautions do we need to take? Do we need to relook at our ISM code-driven SMS? It's going to be very interesting webinar, and which is co-organized by ICS Hong Kong London Maritime Arbitrators Association, Indian Maritime University, HKMAG, which is Hong Kong Maritime Arbitration Group, and of course, Singapore Chamber of Maritime Arbitration. So, and of course, all these are supported by the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, East Asia Branch, and Baltic Exchange Witness Association. So we look forward to seeing you on the 15th. And with that, once again, thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
all.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.